Welcome to another episode of the mini-series Can the Record Be Trusted? I am Ulrike Lühe, and with me today is Raji Abdul Salam, who is the Chief Legal Data Archive Analyst, and I'll come back to that, at the Reckoning Project. The Reckoning Project is an organization that seeks to counter disinformation, especially focuses on bridging the gap between journalistic and legal investigations in conflict settings, particularly in Ukraine. Thank you for joining us, Raji.
Thank you for having me, Ulrike.
So for a start, can you tell us about what does the Reckoning Project do? And in particular, how does this relate to records and documentation?
So basically, the Reckoning Project is an initiative that started with the beginning of the war in Ukraine. And it was by some active people who have a long history in documenting war crimes and crimes against humanity. And some of the co-founders were pure journalists. Some of them is academic. And some of them were lawyers. Now, what happened is they found the chance and the challenge from the previous chapters of wars that happened. And one of the things that was so difficult is when you take a document or do a documentation, how much that documentation can be used, how much damage it can do, because some people think documentation always do good. No, documentation can be something that can cause damage with the wrong hands. And also how we can preserve the right and the ambitions of the people we are documenting to access justice, to collect their memories, to see what happened if these people are being, for example, genocided. They are about to end, or there is a certain aspect of them is being annihilated, for example. So documentation is very important at the time. And what happened is they sat together and they agreed on creating the Reckoning Project. And their focus was on the war in Ukraine. Their focus was on what's happening on the ground, how we can document it in the best ways. And this is why they contacted me. I got contacted from now she's the head of the Reckoning Project because we have some connections. And she knows me from my work about litigation and documenting war crimes against humanity in Syria and in Iraq, and also trying to build legal cases under universal jurisdiction, for example, in Germany, limited jurisdiction in Netherlands. And they told me about the challenges, and then we sat, and then we got expanded with more legal support, and we started the Reckoning Project.
And so you're mentioning already sort of the different roles that come together in the Reckoning Project. And your title is that of Chief Legal Data Analyst, if I'm not mistaken. What exactly does that mean? What does it look like? What's the job description, but also what does the day-to-day of that job look like?
You forgot one of the things that is very important, the archive.
Okay. So Chief Legal Data Archive Analyst?
Exactly.
Is that it? Yes.
Because, if we go for simple way of building legal cases, you would have some witnesses, and these witnesses are related to a certain crime. And this crime have a very obvious contextual elements of crime, and everything can be linear from that time to collect the testimonies. As a lawyer, you create a criminal complaint, legal theory criminal complaint, and then you start to litigate. But what happened in wars, first of all, justice is very slow. If you look for any conflict, years and years and years after the conflict to have accountability or litigation, unless it is, we call it the vengeful justice, where you create a revolutionary court, whatever you want to name it, and you just do extrajudicial expedited action of extrajudicial killing, extrajudicial imprisoning, and all these things that the history taught us big lessons about such courts and what resulted from it. So usually, when you have this small amount of witnesses, it's manageable. But what happens when you have thousands of witnesses and they are connected with different war crimes, and these different war crimes serve the same purpose, So they start to repeat themselves in a very systematic way, or they are started to be taught as a culture, and then they are widespread attacks. And these things started to infringe on something called crimes against the humanity, because now it's systematic. And if, God forbid, the action that has been done on the ground is damaging a certain population beyond recovery, what happened is we have a concern of genocide, because the population cannot recover what they lost from cultural meaning, from DNA pool, from all the things that you see. We have crazy examples from Genghis Khan, the Holocaust, ex-Yugoslavian war. We have what we are witnessing now, plausible attempt of genocide in Gaza. All of this raised the concern of genocide, and all of this needs a crazy amount of archives, because you have to make sure that you give the ability for the legal processes to take time, and at the same time you preserve the right for people to access justice and their access to justice to be preserved. If they needed to go this way, sometimes they just want to collect the memory, to know what they lost as a heritage, to know what they lost as a DNA pool, So basically my job is to make sure I organize the data archive in a way that is easily accessible, easily processed, and I find the arguments. And my data analysis comes from the side where you have a certain action that may repeat itself or follow a certain processes. And we call it the pattern analysis. And it's very important because it can constitute a pillar for what is later comes from the legal team as a legal theory. Like they would say, we have a war crime of deportation. That means a group of people forcefully transferred or deported from point A to point B. But if this action is being widespread or repeated in the same way to serve the same people, of creating a state of ethnic cleansing or force for deportation of all these villages, you have to see the pattern. And my job is to find these patterns and present it in empirical form to my legal team. So they create the legal theory that goes later to create a criminal complaint under a certain jurisdiction, because litigation has different venue: national, international, and universal.
One question that I'm wondering is, I think some of the analysis responds to legal categories that are being usually worked with in these kinds of judicial settings, right? But do you also see this technology or sort of these bigger data sets that we suddenly have contributing to changing our understanding of these crimes? Sort of, are you, because you have access to more data and witnesses, able to uncover new patterns or new crimes that we haven't even named as such?
Of course. Yeah. I give you an example. When we started to look at how things were happening in Syria, we thought like the Islamic State organization, ISIS or IS, if you want to go for the name, their action is to force a certain dogma and to build a certain regime that serves their own ideology. So most of these things can be accessed through political point of view. But when we started to see that their action is not exclusionist, they don't cancel people politically, but rather they go for a way that they destroy a certain culture that these people do. They destroy them physically as a human beings. And this is what they did with the Yazidis, by the way. We didn't see how much terrifying such action is until we started to look for the holistic picture. Because when it comes to mass murder that they did against the clans, we thought, okay, it's a mass murder, it's extrajudicial killing, it's action of war, crimes against humanity. But when we saw that they destroyed a complete DNA pools of people, that is Bedouin clans in certain area, we started to say, no, this is a crazy concern of a genocide. What they did to the Yazidis, they systematically enslave and rape women. They systematically killed the men. They systematically indoctrinated the children to erase their identity. You see, all of these, if you look, indoctrination by itself, for example, is not a crime. But if you put them with these four, It means that the Yazidi population is being destroyed systematically beyond recovery, and they cannot recover what they lost. By the way, between Jabal Sinjar, like Sinjar area between Iraq and Syria, what they faced is a damage that they will never be able to recover from. So it is a genocide. It's not only
Right.
intended genocide. It's not plausible anymore. We didn't see that, by the way, in the beginning.
Right. So
We
you
didn't
needed
see
the kind
Yeah.
of data you can only access digitally in those amounts. Okay.
I want to give you an example about bad use of information. I forgot exactly because it wasn't part of my my studies, but my other colleague researchers, they were on archive, and we were saying how archive can damage people. So basically, one of the craziest countries, they did an amazing population surveys. So when they were talking about this population surveys, they could know each ethnicity, each religion, where they exist. I think it was Chase or Poland. So when the Nazis started to target the minorities, in particular the Jews, in these two countries, I forgot exactly if it is Chase or another one. So I don't want to use a wrong information. But what happened was their access and knowledge about this population was so good that they created efficient solutions. They call it the final solutions to murder and extinct this population. You know, so their genocidal intent was culminated in a genocide. And you see, the archive here was used in a very bad way. Same with this with the Stasi's. They created an amazing archive to use it of creating a better policing. So the record can be used badly. So the way that I believe, and this is the question for the way that you build your own title for this podcast. To me, I always trust the archive that has a methodology that is empirical and scientific, but I don't trust the people who manage the archives usually.
You're pointing at a very important question, but what makes the archive trustworthy? I mean, the use of it is one thing, and I think every archive is open to different interpretations. That's the nature of archives, right? And it can be used in different hands. But what makes it trustworthy in the sense of the records say what they say they're saying? And especially in digital spaces, which brings, I think, a whole new set of challenges for these types of questions.
I don't want to go in archive ontology because I'm not an authority on it, but me and you agree on one thing so we can move forward. Do you believe the archive objective is the sake of preserving a certain document or a certain object, regardless of it is a value within a system? Or should an archive be something that always, an object that always have to serve a purpose? So if you give me the definition that we have to work on, then I can follow with you and we can talk. But if you don't give me these definitions, I will go for what I do, and it will be very limited of what I do and very, very boxed in my own definitions.
I am interested in your definition and what you do, but my response to that would be that I think any archives, in the sense of a systematic collection of documentation of whatever nature, pursues some form of objective because it has to limit itself to collecting certain things. Otherwise, it would be collecting everything. So I do think there is some intentionality underlying any of that collection.
So what we agree on now, that there is nothing called archive for the sake of archive. There's an archive that has to serve a certain purpose. I'm trying to rephrase. If I am wrong, let us fix it.
I think any archive aims to serve one purpose or another, yes.
Okay, then if I want to define what I do through this definition itself, then my purpose is to preserve the access of justice and memory for the people that I'm collecting their testimonies and their stories. So what I do is, and in my job, because in different jobs there is different things I do, but in this specific job, I try to preserve And the best way to preserve the human stories, regardless of how we take it, is to digitize it. And to be able to digitize it, I have to have my supreme manifest. And this is the first document generated from that interview or from that incident that could be, for example, like a document. And this document to me is immutable. I cannot do anything with it. So this is something that illegal people or people who collect this way of evidence, regardless if it is physical or non-physical, and you digitize it, because you can digitize the remnant of a human being, for example. This is part of jobs I did. Part of it is to process corpses fast, and in the same way we preserve their identity. So I have this a human corpse, and then I have to preserve its identity. That means I have to claim a certain power that give me a name or a number that I have to take, and then I have to take the photos, the DNA sample, and all of that has to be digitized. That means it will be translated in a data that can be kept. So that data that I digitized is immutable. It cannot be changed, regardless if the actual remnant stayed or not. And this is what makes my job very difficult, because my power starts when I digitize that evidence, if it is a testimony or, as we said, a relic, and how we make it in a way that if Ulrike, for example, wants to do the same project, it's replicable. You will have the same result that I had, because it has to be scientific, and the scientific methodology forces the replicability, the rationale, and the coherency beneath of what you do. And one of the biggest challenges is the replicability when you are doing archiving, digitized archiving. And this is the trick. And why we do digitized archiving, if I may use a very vanity, because we are nerds, we are introverts, we want to feel like we are in power. So we use how we immortalize the data that we digitized to make it immutable. Is you have to make sure that if any other person followed the methodology or similar or a scientific methodology, they will have a similar results. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we face. My job is to use a methodology that is scientific, that is empirical. And the empirical takes us to the second thing that we do, and that is the data analysis. Because the first part is immutable. We can't do anything with it. It has to be preserved like this. But at the same time, there are people who wants to have the access for this data. And here we have the protocol that we agreed on, the consent, the scope of consent and jurisdiction that we have, and the way that should be these things processed. Because the empirical form is a reduced form, that you have all this crazy amount of data, you rearrange it in a way that is being summarized so people understand what they are dealing with when they want to go to the immutable evidence that is unchangeable within our archive.
So in that particular case, let's say the record is trustworthy if you are able to create that immutable data and then sort of preserve it as such, whilst also enabling people to use it, but of course in ways that they can't change it.
Yeah. For example, in the reckoning project, we have a do no harm policy. We have to make, you can call it as ethical archiving, when you have to make sure that the object, because the digitized object is the holy grail for us archivists, but still this holy grail has a physical dimension that could be killed, that could be destroyed, that could be targeted, or that could be stigmatized. Like, look at the amazing politics we have. They use statistics, archived statistics, to signal a certain realities that to them it's real. So again, it's abusing the archive. So you have to anonymize, you have to create an empirical form that tells Ulrike what is this piece of the document is about, the immutable document, and at the same time protects the people or the object that we are talking about. We call it the metadata and biodata separation. My job as an archivist, the very boring job when I digitized evidence, is to keep the log. That means when this document that could be deja vu, could be PDF, could be doc, created, modified, who modified it, when it is being accessed. So I have to keep the record because I have to prove for you that this is immutable. No one played with it. There is summary, but the summary, yes, people would modify it, but the actual thing is not is unchangeable.
That also means that the Reckoning project works with both digital and data and analog records, let's say, that you then digitize, though, right? Or I assume for historical context and sort of background and all of that.
Because of limited resources, we don't have the ability to keep physical records.
Right.
For that, we focus on human testimonies. But sometimes you have actual physical records. So you have to make sure that you have to preserve that. That means you need a very special place, cold, non-humid. Like if it is, for example, in Syria, now we have all the records that came out from the jails.
Mm-hmm.
So some of these records is already being damaged because, the Assad regime wants to hide their crimes. So they ban these documents. So the actual record that is banned, there is way to extract data by a certain for example, you use X-ray, infrared. There is scientific way to use these, to extract these data. But also the question is, if you want to do that, you have to damage the actual document. Same with all paintings, So the question is the value of archiving that is that important? So we damage the actual physical object. So if archive for the sake of archive, they will say no. We have to keep the actual form as the immutable form. We don't digitize it. But archive for the sake of purpose, like revealing what happened to the people who disappeared in that jail, and this is the jail record, for example, then it will compel us. No, the information is more important than the relic. So let us damage it. It's all good. Let's damage it if we can recover it. Because if you have a banned document and you do, for example, certain infrared or whatever way of copying it, you have to destroy the page that you copy so you can see the page beneath it.
Yeah, that's a question of how do you understand the purpose of archiving? Is it to preserve or to preserve in order to use, right? I think.
Why we digitize? Because we know that everything will be destroyed, and the only thing we believe in up till now is the digital virtual version of every thing we have.
Those are also can also be destroyed, though, right? Like I think there's an argument where they are similarly vulnerable in different ways, but also vulnerable.
The fear is not being for them to actually being destroyed. The fear is to be tampered.
Okay.
Imagine you have a record that say 600 persons were going to a picnic, and then they found a bird, and then they ate the bird. It's totally different than 600 persons were shooting birds while picnicking, and then they ate the bird. There is a big difference. And this is why I believe in immutability, as my mentor used to talk about.
I mean, I think you work with a huge range of digital tools in your everyday work, but can you tell us a bit about, I think the last couple of years especially have seen such a rapid increase in the tools that are available, what they can do. How has it changed your work in a sort of a broad stroke sense, I guess?
Basically, first of all, we have better way to incorporate data. When you digitize a document, in old days, we used to either have a scanned copy of it, and then we have to use ORC to do that. And the ORC create a digitized version of the context of that document. Now we have something called AI agents, that whatever information you give, voice, video, picture, whatever kind of file, they are able to scrub it. And this is something very beautiful, because the use of artificial intelligence is so good as long as you teach them what to do, because they hallucinate. So sometimes they are trying to translate something from Arabic to English, or from Aramaic, for example, to English. And then they do a literal document, that the actual document that is written, change it to a digitized version of the same language. And then they started to create a different language, or to try to interpret these things to have the best meaning for us to understand. And then sometimes the semantic goes crazy, and they go like different, especially if they don't know the actual meaning of a certain word. They start to hallucinate, creating crazy stuff. Yeah, so I love the fact that now we have AI to help us in archiving. It makes my life way easier, but you have to always put a leash on it, because in the end of the day, like in my case, we have a closed source of information. So the AI learns from what we actually have. But imagine when it's an open source information, that means it goes for the most recurrent answers and come back to you. And sometimes the most recurrent answer is not the right answer. Also, we have better scanning techniques, like spectrum analysis. We didn't have that accessibility. We have better recording machines. Now we have way better that dictaphone with even simple phones, like the accessibility of technologies in collecting these things. I remember the floppy disk,
Yeah.
it was so sloppy. Now we have crazy terabits of information that can be, and wait until we have quantum computing. We will have like crazy amount of storage. So the older generation, they have the urgency of limitation between resources. They cannot basically digitize everything because they don't have the space for that. Now we started to be arrogant, that, or in vanity, that we believe we can digitize everything with our capacity.
And there's a challenge there as well, no? Because I think even in the old days, archivists had the challenge that often they had too much documentation to be able to go through it all and categorize it and analyze it. And sort of the amount of information we have access to has changed, I think, with digitization. But we're constantly increasing our capacity to collect records and to analyze them. But will that hit boundaries at some point where we're just collecting everything because we think we can and should, and does that pose its own set of challenges for this kind of work?
It takes us to the first question. Are we archiving for the sake of archiving, or are we archiving for the sake of purpose? So do you believe like one of the craziest, let's say, moments of archivists, net people talking on some alcohol is, imagine now humanity will end and we have all this data is being kept in this amazing crystal of super quantum computer. And then people, even if humanity ended, same with relics, still their existence will be preserved and everything about them will be known, and we are not even going for the way that this knowledge is even being developed, because now we have the ability to create a machine that can learn. It's not
Right.
sentient, but imagine if it is sentient. So the archive basically would be acting as a holistic memory for a complete race.
So do you think we're shifting from archiving for particular purposes because of the limitations we had, towards archiving for the sake of archiving, because eventually we will be able to archive everything and maybe even process all of it at some stage? Is that
Yeah.
one of the big shifts that coming with these technologies?
Yeah, because power corrupts the purpose. Because the most beautiful thing about my life when I was an archivist is that when I have limited resources, because it creates a sense of urgency, and my purpose start to have priority. But if you give me unlimited resources, I will be very arrogant. I want to archive everything.
Right. Interesting. Okay. All right. I think I'll sort of leave it at that. Thank you for the very interesting conversation and for giving us insights into your work. And yeah, best of luck with this difficult work going forward as well.
I hope I could help by any means in the interview.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.